What if the very thing you're most proud of, your loyalty, is the very thing that's breaking your heart? What if the guilt you feel about walking away isn't proof that you're cruel, but proof that you've been conditioned to betray yourself? Let me say something that might shake you. Loyalty without boundaries is not love. It's self-abandonment. Somewhere along the way, many of us were taught that being good means staying. Staying when it hurts. Staying when it humiliates us. Staying when our needs are dismissed. We confuse endurance with virtue. We confuse suffering with strength. And we confuse loyalty with love. But here's the hidden cost. Every time you remain loyal to someone who repeatedly violates your trust, dismisses your worth, or erodes your peace, you send a quiet message to yourself: I am not worth protecting. And that message sinks deep. Cutting someone off, especially someone you've loved, defended, or invested years into, feels like treason. It feels like failure. It feels like you're the villain in someone else's story. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappoint someone else in order to stop disappointing yourself. The guilt you feel, it's not always a moral compass. Sometimes it's just the echo of old training, the training that said your value comes from how much you can tolerate. And today, we're going to challenge that lie, because protecting your peace is not betrayal. It's courage. Let's talk about that guilt, because when you even think about cutting someone off, your chest tightens. Your mind races. You start rewriting history. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I should try harder. That guilt feels like evidence that you're doing something wrong. But what if it's not? Guilt often shows up when we violate our values. But here's the deeper truth. Sometimes guilt shows up when we violate our conditioning. And those are not the same thing. If you were raised to believe that loyalty means never leaving, if you were praised for being the strong one who absorbs pain, if you were taught that keeping the peace matters more than telling the truth, then choosing yourself will feel like rebellion. And rebellion, especially for empathetic, loving people, feels dangerous. Many of us learned early that love had strings attached. That approval could be withdrawn. That conflict meant rejection. So we became accommodating, hyper-aware, over-responsible. We learned to manage other people's emotions like it was our full-time job. So when you decide to walk away from someone who consistently hurts you, your nervous system doesn't whisper, "Good job." It screams, "You're about to lose connection." That's not guilt rooted in morality. That's fear rooted in attachment. And here's the heartbreaking part. You may feel guilty for protecting yourself from someone who never felt guilty for hurting you. Sit with that. The discomfort of cutting someone off doesn't automatically mean it's wrong. Sometimes it simply means you're doing something unfamiliar, and unfamiliar feels unsafe. But growth always begins in that space. And choosing yourself will almost always feel uncomfortable before it feels peaceful. Let me tell you something most people won't say out loud. Sometimes loyalty becomes a silent contract. I will keep absorbing this as long as you keep needing me. And that contract feels powerful. It makes you feel important, indispensable, chosen, but it's also a trap, because the moment you try to step outside that role, the fixer, the forgiver, the emotional shock absorber, everything shifts. Suddenly you're selfish. Suddenly you're cold. Suddenly you've changed. Of course you've changed. You stopped accepting crumbs and started asking for nourishment. The hidden cost of loyalty is that it can tie your identity to your endurance. You begin to believe that your worth is measured by how much you can carry without collapsing. You become proud of your tolerance for pain. You wear it like armor. But here's the truth. If your loyalty requires you to shrink, silence yourself, or betray your own boundaries, it is not loyalty. It's self-erasure. Real love does not demand that you disappear to prove devotion. And when you begin to see that the relationship only works if you stay small, that's when the grief hits, because you realize it was never mutual growth. It was mutual dependency. It was a system that functioned as long as you kept functioning. Cutting someone off doesn't just mean losing them. It means breaking a contract you didn't even realize you signed. And breaking that contract will feel terrifying because now you have to build an identity that isn't built on suffering. But I promise you this, you are allowed to exist outside the role that hurt you, and you are allowed to outgrow dynamics that once defined you. Let's talk about something tender. You are not loyal because you're weak. You're loyal because you care deeply. You see the good in people. You understand their trauma. You recognize their wounds. You tell yourself they've been through so much. You make excuses because your heart is wired for empathy. But here's the hard truth. Empathy without boundaries becomes self-betrayal when you constantly excuse someone's behavior because you understand their pain. You slowly teach yourself that your pain matters less. You become compassionate toward everyone except yourself. And that's where the hidden cost shows up. You start tolerating disrespect because you get why they act that way. You swallow your hurt because they didn't mean it. You minimize your needs because they're struggling. But understanding someone's trauma does not obligate you to endure their dysfunction. Let me say that again. You can have compassion for someone's wounds and still refuse to be wounded by them. Those two things can exist at the same time. The guilt of cutting someone off often whispers you're abandoning them. But protecting yourself from repeated harm is not abandonment. It's accountability. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for them and for you is to stop participating in a dynamic that keeps both of you stuck. Because when you stay out of guilt, you're not actually helping, you're enabling, and deep down, you know it. Compassion should expand you, not exhaust you. If loving someone requires you to betray yourself, that isn't compassion. That's fear disguised as kindness. And you deserve a love that doesn't cost you your own integrity. Let's go deeper. One of the most paralyzing fears about cutting someone off isn't loneliness. It's not even loss. It's the fear of being seen of being seen as the villain. You don't want to be the cold one. You don't want to be the heartless one. You don't want to be the person who gave up. So you stay. You stay because you would rather carry private pain than public judgment. But here's the truth that will set you free when you start setting boundaries. People who benefited from your lack of them will almost always protest. They will call your growth betrayal. They will call your boundaries cruelty. They will call your self-respect selfishness. And if you've built your identity around being the good one, that criticism will cut deep. Because now you're not just losing a relationship, you're losing the version of yourself that was praised for being endlessly accommodating. But let me ask you something. Is being good worth being chronically exhausted? Is being understanding worth being consistently disrespected? Is being loyal worth abandoning yourself? You are not responsible for managing the story someone tells about you when you choose peace. People will rewrite the narrative to protect their comfort. And here's the most painful part. You may not get closure. You may not get acknowledgement. You may not get an apology. You may only get silence or blame. And you will have to be strong enough to live with being misunderstood. Because sometimes growth looks like letting people think you're the villain while you quietly become the hero of your own life. That is courage, not loud courage. Quiet, soul-saving courage. No one prepares you for this part. Cutting someone off isn't just an act of strength, it's an act of grief. You are grieving someone who is still alive. You're grieving the version of them you hoped they would become. You're grieving the future you imagined. You're grieving the inside jokes, the memories, the history. And sometimes the grief isn't even about who they were, it's about who you were with them. Walking away means accepting that love wasn't enough. That effort wasn't enough. That your loyalty couldn't fix what they weren't willing to face. That realization hurts in a way that's hard to explain because we want to believe that if we just love harder, try longer, forgive deeper, things will change. But relationships don't transform because one person endures more pain. They transform when both people take responsibility. And when that doesn't happen, staying becomes a slow erosion of self. Grief after cutting someone off can feel confusing. One day you feel empowered. The next day you miss them so much it aches in your bones. You question your decision. You romanticize the good moments. You forget the nights you cried. That doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're human. You can miss someone and still know they were not good for you. You can love someone and still choose distance. You can feel sadness and still be certain. Grief does not invalidate your boundary. It confirms that you cared, and caring deeply is not a weakness. It's proof that your heart is capable of love, even when you have to love yourself enough to walk away. Let's name something that hides beneath loyalty over responsibility. Somewhere in your life, you learned that it was your job to hold everything together. You became the mediator, the fixer, the emotional caretaker, the one who smooths things over so no one leaves. And when something breaks, your first instinct is not, did they cross a line? It's, what did I do wrong? That's not humility. That's conditioning. Over responsibility convinces you that if someone is upset, it must be your fault. If a relationship fails, you didn't try hard enough. If someone hurts you, maybe you're being too sensitive. So cutting someone off feels like negligence. It feels like you're failing at your assignment. But here's the truth. You were never assigned to save anyone. You were never responsible for regulating another adult's behavior. You were never meant to carry the emotional weight of two people. When you constantly overfunction, it allows the other person to underfunction, and that imbalance becomes normal until one day you are exhausted, resentful, invisible. Breaking that cycle means tolerating something deeply uncomfortable, letting other people experience the consequences of their choices without rescuing them. And that can feel brutal. Because if you're used to being needed, stepping back can feel like abandonment. But it's not abandonment. It's accountability. You are not obligated to sacrifice your peace so someone else can avoid discomfort. Let them feel what they feel. Let them sit with what they've done. Your job is not to fix what you did not break. Your job is to stop breaking yourself trying to fix it. Let's be honest about something no one glamorizes. When you cut someone off, especially someone woven into your daily life, there is a silence that follows, and that silence can feel deafening. Your phone doesn't light up the same way. The routines shift. The emotional intensity, even if it was chaotic, disappears. And suddenly you're left alone with your own thoughts. And loneliness whispers, go back. Not because it was healthy, not because it was safe, but because it was familiar. Familiarity can feel like love when you're afraid of being alone. Choosing yourself often comes with a season of isolation. And if you've always defined yourself through connection, that isolation can feel like you've lost part of your identity. But here's what's really happening. You're detoxing from a dynamic that overstimulated your nervous system. You're recalibrating. You're learning what peace feels like without chaos attached to it. At first, peace feels boring. At first, stability feels empty because your body was used to the highs and lows, the apologies, the reconciliation, the drama disguised as passion. And now it's quiet. But quiet is not emptiness. Quiet is space. Space to rediscover what you like, what you need, what you refuse to tolerate ever again. Loneliness after cutting someone off doesn't mean you made a mistake. It means you stepped into the unknown. And the unknown is where self-trust is rebuilt. Stay there long enough, and what once felt lonely will begin to feel liberating. Because you'll realize something powerful. Peace may be quieter than chaos, but it is infinitely more sustaining. Here's the part most people don't want to admit. Cutting someone off is reclaiming power you may have thought was gone forever. For years, maybe decades, you've been giving away pieces of yourself to preserve a relationship. You bent, you apologized, you minimized your feelings, all in the name of loyalty. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you forgot what it felt like to stand fully in your own worth. When you finally step away, the world doesn't just notice the absence. You notice the return of your voice, your boundaries, your breathing space. That tightness in your chest, it begins to loosen. The guilt, it starts to quiet. The whispers that told you owe them fade. Reclaiming your power doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop sacrificing yourself to maintain someone else's comfort at the cost of your own integrity. It means you honor your values over their expectations. And yes, that power comes with responsibility. Responsibility to yourself first, responsibility to recognize patterns, responsibility to refuse to re-enter dynamics that cost you your peace. It also comes with clarity. You begin to see who truly nurtures you and who depletes you, who elevates you and who diminishes you. And suddenly, loyalty looks different. It no longer demands suffering. It no longer requires self-erasure. This is where transformation happens, where courage and self-respect meet, where the guilt that once felt crushing begins to feel like a faint echo of a story you no longer have to live. And the most radical part, you realize that the person you feared losing most, yourself, was never gone. You were just letting someone else hold the steering wheel. It's time to drive your own life. Now let's bring it home. The hidden cost of loyalty is not just the exhaustion, the grief, or the quiet suffering. It's the slow erosion of your sense of self. It's the betrayal you carry when you give everything to someone who won't meet you halfway. It's the guilt that tells you you're wrong for choosing yourself. But here's the liberating truth. Walking away doesn't erase the love you felt, the lessons you learned, or the care you offered. It simply honors the fact that you are worthy of protection, respect, and peace. You are allowed to leave relationships that no longer serve your growth, without shame, without apology, without compromise. Freedom doesn't come from clinging. Freedom comes from boundaries. Freedom comes from the courage to say, I matter, my heart matters, my life matters. And when you finally embrace that courage, you realize that loyalty to yourself is the most radical, the most profound, and the most life-giving loyalty of all. You will feel fear, you will feel grief, you will feel guilt. But each of those feelings is proof that you are human and that you are stepping into your own power. And on the other side of that fear is a life where love doesn't cost you your soul, where respect is mutual, and where your heart is finally free to thrive. So stop confusing endurance with virtue. Stop mistaking suffering for loyalty. Step away, breathe, grieve, heal, and reclaim the life you've been sacrificing for far too long. Because the bravest, most revolutionary act of love you can perform is the love you give to yourself. And that, my friends, is where real freedom begins.